What's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul with a comic book mail call for Liberty Hill Comics, where I share my passion and over 40 years' experience comic book collecting, investing, and conservation with you. The comic we are discussing today is another Golden Age All-Star Comics issue for my personal collection that I picked up from Shortboxed. I now have 40% of the complete Golden Age run of All-Star Comics, so copies that meet my buying criteria are getting more difficult to find each day. And if I want to keep making progress, I have to be satisfied with either fewer comic books each year or paying up more for them. But these decisions are all part of the hunt that we enjoy as collectors, so managing them is par for the course if you're trying to put together a truly epic collection. Today, we'll go over this book, the details, the market report, and my tips and tricks for making progress on your collection. Seller's done a great job with the packaging here. Sorry it's taking me a moment, but I don't like to have the loose tape anywhere. They've included some freebies as well, which they certainly didn't have to do. The Shortboxed app is always adding new features, and they have recently added feedback. The feedback at the moment is limited, I believe, just to the packaging, how good of a job they did in packing and shipping. This seller obviously knows what they're doing, and there she is. High grade, what a beauty. Man, I'd never get tired of seeing these books. Rare Golden Age books. It's lovely to see. Oh, there's a nice Mylar and a nice little Shortbox sticker on the Mylar as well. That's cool. Look how beautifully that presents in an 8.5. Well, as I like to say, what is it and why do we care? This is All-Star Comics number 18 in CGC 8.5 Universal with off-white to white pages. It's the fall of 1943 issue, so published at the peak of the war-era Golden Age. It's written by Gardner Fox and illustrated by a team of artists, including Frank Harry, who drew the cover here. Although CGC does not denote it on the label, it's the first appearance of supervillain the King Bee and all of his minions, including the Spider-Men and the Ant-Men. It's King Bee's only Golden Age appearance, but he does appear in Copper Age stories written by JSA superfan Roy Thomas. For those not familiar, the Justice Society of America were the first superhero team in all of comic books, and some believe they were the greatest superhero team to ever grace the pages of funny books. When comics fandom got started in earnest in the early 1960s, putting together a complete run of All-Star Comics was a rite of passage, considered a must for anybody who considered themselves a serious comic book collector. All-Star Comics featured the JSA in 55 issues, published over 11 years, from their first appearance here in issue number 3 in 1940 until issue number 57 in March of 1951. All-Star Comics had 3 writers for the entire 11-year run. Gardner Fox, the first and greatest of the JSA writers, wrote 2/3 of their tales, including their introductory story here in All-Star number 3. All-Star was published by All-American Comics, which was co-marketed with National and Detective Comics under the DC Bullet at the time, and later merged into the company we know today as DC Comics. All-Star Comics is one of the most important Golden Age comic book series, and it has several big keys issues, in addition to the first appearance of the JSA, including the first female superheroine in all of comic books, which is Hawkgirl in issue number 5. The first time Batman and Superman meet, which occurs in issue number 7, and the mega key of the series, the first appearance of Wonder Woman in issue 8 by William Moulton Marston. It also includes first appearances of JSA villains, Brainwave in issue 15, the Psychopirate in issue 23, the Wizard in issue 34, Perdegaton in issue 35, the Injustice Society in issue 37, and the Alchemist in issue 42. In issue number 57, the last issue, we have the first and only appearance of the villainous Key, as well as the last Golden Age appearance of Dr. Midnight, the Flash, and Green Lantern. All three would be absent from comic books for over a decade after this comic was published. All-Star Comics is one of the most important and influential of Golden Age comic book series and is highly sought after by Golden Age collectors. It's my favorite Golden Age title, and one of my life goals is to complete the Golden Age run in mid to high grade. With that intro for context, let's get into issue number 18, written by the incomparable Gardner Fox. It has one of the best splash pages in the entire series, in my opinion. Roll call is given as Hawkman, Sandman, Dr. Midnight, Starman, the Atom, Dr. Fate, the Spectre. Johnny Thunder is listed as Tardy, and Wonder Woman is listed as the Secretary. Hawkman isn't explicitly listed in roll call as the chairman, but he's clearly acting as chairman as the story opens. But this preamble is so great that I need to read it out loud. Here we go. Many learned savants have often wondered what would happen if insects, which, in proportion to their size, are many, many times stronger than men, challenged man's supremacy on Earth. The question is now being answered in a way that startles the imagination. Men endowed with the relative strength of ants, the web-spinning ability of spiders, and the destructive talents of termites threaten to destroy civilization. Opposing them are 8 men, 8 fighters for freedom and justice, pitting their brains and brawn against the hordes of the leaping grasshopper, against the flying fighting hornet, against the poisonous sting of the bee. The Justice Society of America. I keep telling you, that Gardner Fox was a genius. The introductory chapter opens with Hawkman showing off an insect display to the assembled team, minus Johnny Thunder, who is late. He explains that a master criminal is at work and that men with the relative strength of ants are committing fantastic crimes, and that men that can leap like grasshoppers and spin webs like spiders have been spotted as well. The team vows to do whatever necessary to ensure that villainous insects do not displace man as the dominant species on Earth. On the next page, Johnny Thunder enters the clubhouse, walking on the ceiling and buzzing. He's still himself, minus the peculiar behavior and the extra ability to walk up walls, and the JSA realize the urgency of their task. Each member takes an envelope with the task from Hawkman and sets off, leaving the last envelope for Hawkman, who is unsure whether Johnny is up to adventuring in his current state. Hawkman's chapter is penciled by Sheldon Moldoff, his regular artist from Flash Comics. As Hawkman flies off, we are treated to the scene inside the National Bank, where a human leader guides insect men with enhanced strength that shoot a gummy substance on guards and break into the vault. As the termite men load the loot and make a getaway, the gangster explains that the king bee approached him with the idea of using men enhanced with insect hormones to pull off heists. We hear that the other gangsters were leery of the idea, but now that it's proven, they are on board, and Hawkman arrives at the residence of Abner Mason. Abner explains that his son has been gone for 2 weeks and now sleeps in trees at the old Cartwell house. Hawkman assures him it'll be okay and sets off for the Cartwell house, where he overhears the criminals counting loot and planning their next job. He bursts in and engages them in some fisticuffs. Hawkman makes short work of 2 gangsters, but one of the men blows a whistle that summons the termite men, and they quickly gum Hawkman up. Tying him up, they set the building ablaze and flee, hoping that that will be the end of Hawkman. But the flames melt the gummy substance, which drips down and puts out the fire under Hawkman. After freeing himself from the ropes, he subdues the entire team, termite men and gangsters, and takes the termite men to an entomologist for treatment before announcing he's off to find the king bee. In the Sandman's chapter, penciled by Pierce Rice, we are introduced to chemist Serge Astrakov, who left Europe for America to work on synthesizing rubber, and while working in the laboratory heard a strange noise coming from the underground. Borer men, who seemed to have snails' shells on their backs, burrowed into his laboratory and took his formula for synthetic rubber, which is critical to the Allies winning the war against Hitler. The Sandman sets off after them down the tunnel left in the lab. He encounters one Borer man and defeats him with some effort before making his way deeper into the tunnels and overhearing the organizers of the theft crowing about the value of the formula. The thieves plan to sell the formula for $1 million and double-cross the king bee, as well as murder the Borer men by poisoning them with carbon monoxide. The Sandman saves the Borer men and vows to get them treatment. The Sandman then catches up to the double-crossing thieves and dispatches them with some chin music. He learns from them the location of the king bee in the forest and sets off to confront him in the Sandmobile. The Spectres chapter is penciled by Bernard Bailey, his regular artist in More Fun Comics at the time. It opens with an underwater scene and the Spectre pursuing a waterbug man. But he's no match for the Spectre, who breaks the waterbug man's air tank while engaging him in some fisticuffs, whereupon his foe quickly begs for mercy as he can't breathe underwater without it. The Spectre grows to giant size to lift the waterbug man from the sea, and upon doing so notices a yacht under attack by the rest of the waterbug men. He grows in size even further to lift the yacht to safety in the palm of his hand, easily dislodging the waterbug men. We learn that the lead waterbug man is none other than Chick Dempsey, a champion swimmer and diver, holder of world records in a dozen events. But Chick fell on hard times after college, and, not being able to find legitimate work, answered the king bee's call to a life of crime after augmentation with insect hormones. Chick is glad to be unburdened of his secret and tells the Spectre he was never cut out for crime. He was just hungry. The Spectre asks for his help in finding the king bee, but first they set off to the lair of the waterbug men. The Spectre forces all the waterbug men into an underground cave so he can return later to restore them, and sets off after the king bee himself. Dr. Fate's chapter, penciled by Howard Sherman, opens with a swarm of hornet men attacking a jet with Tommy guns in an attempt to bring her to the ground. The hornet men force the plane to the ground and escape with the precious cargo, leaving the crew and passengers stranded. They use the same tactic to ground several other planes until Dr. Fate is patrolling the area of the crimes, when the human leaders of the Hornet Men recognize him. As Dr. Fate flies over the hideout of the Hornet Men and their captors, the Hornet Men set upon him in the sky, Tommy guns ablaze. After Dr. Fate dispatches 2 of the Hornet Men, the others flee, leading Dr. Fate to their leaders. Dr. Fate quickly makes hash of the Hasher's face with his fist and puts the other criminals away. He puts the Hornet Men back in the cellar for safekeeping, discovers the king bee was behind the plot, and vows to send police and scientists to clean up the situation while he sets out for the Great Forest. Incidentally, even in a who's who of artists like this issue has, Howard Sherman's line work really stands out here. So go check him out in More Fun Comics, why don't you? Dr. Midnight's chapter is penciled by Stan Ash and opens with a scene set during the Great Depression, 10 years before our main story. While 2 boys are on a camping trip One of them is bitten by a spider. Fred Norman unfortunately watched his friend Jim die of the spider bite and grows up with a case of arachnophobia. Unfortunately for him, he thought his late-night job at the bank would keep him safe from spiders. But when the Spider-Men invaded the bank, he faded at the sight of them. When he came to, the bank had been robbed and he wrote Hawkman to help catch the criminals and clear his name. He tells Dr. Midnight that due to his innate fear of spiders, he can help him find the Spider-Men. And sure enough, he gets creeped out as they pass the hideout of the Spider-Men. You could say he has a sort of spidey sense. Dr. Midnight dispatches the Spider-Men with some chin music and a blackout bomb, and then bursts in on their human leaders, one of whom opens fire on him with a pistol. Dr. Midnight uses another blackout bomb to enable him to overcome the criminals, and Fred overcomes his fear and returns to help. All the bad guys subdued, Fred watches over them until the authorities arrive, and Dr. Midnight heads off to join the other members of the JSA in pursuit of the King Bee. Starman's chapter is penciled by Pierce Rice and starts with a nice half-splash page in which we learn about the proportionate strength of ants and a bank robbery in progress with what is by now a familiar sight, insect men being ordered around by human criminals. In this instance, we're introduced to the Ant-Men. Upon seeing the great strength of the Ant-Men as they rip the bronze doors off the bank, the guards flee, but Starman and reinforcements arrive. Starman investigates and, seeing that the bank has already been robbed and they are loading into their getaway car, decides to hitch a ride on the roof to find out where their hideout is. After a short encounter, Starman realizes he's no match physically for the Ant-Men and must use his star rod to good effect. Dissolving a section of ground, he overhears the criminals bragging about the Ant-Men, but explaining that they are deaf and can only be controlled by use of a radio. Starman then makes quick work of the criminals and, taking the microphone, orders the Ant-Men to stay put as he streaks away to engage the King Bee. The Adams chapter is penciled by Joe Gallagher and opens with a half-splash page in which we are introduced to the Green Glacier, an emerald necklace worth an emperor's ransom. We learn the Emerald Glacier is held at Carteret's House of Jewels and see the Grasshopper Men approach. The Grasshopper Men easily steal the Emerald Glacier, but the Atom hops on the back of one to see where they're headed. The Grasshopper Men are so strong they don't notice the weight of the Atom hitching a ride and hop for a full hour to their hideout. There, the Atom learns they too have human masters in cahoots with the King Bee, and once the Grasshopper Men clear out, the Atom makes quick work of the jewel thieves. The Atom makes off with the Green Glacier, but the Grasshopper Men are in pursuit and gaining fast. The Atom dives into a field of wheat, hoping the Grasshopper Men are hungry, and his ploy works. The Grasshopper Men busy themselves eating the grain and leave him to find the nearest entomology department where he solicits help from some scientists. The Atom heads back to the hangout of the jewel thieves to find out who their partner is and where he can be found. Then he's off to the great forest in search of the King Bee, on a course to intercept his fellow JSAers. Johnny Thunder's chapter is illustrated by Stan Ash, and opens with Johnny bemoaning the fact nothing exciting ever happens to him as he walks down the vertical side of a building. We found out he ate some funny-tasting bologna at a cafe that now appears to be overrun with flymen. Johnny enters the establishment to give them a piece of his mind when he's forced at gunpoint to eat some soup laced with insect hormone and is ordered off with the rest of the flymen to a heist. Johnny and the other flymen are told to clear the bank with gas pellets and then to loot the joint. The Thunderbolt reminds Johnny he's a member of the JSA and ought not to be robbing banks. Despite Johnny never saying his magic words, the Thunderbolt sets a trap for the flymen of giant strips of flypaper. The flymen, including Johnny, are caught on the flypaper. After the Thunderbolt releases Johnny, he and Johnny set to also capturing the crooks behind the flymen. They then head back to the cafe to destroy what's left of the soup and torture the proprietor into telling them he was collaborating with the King Bee. And then they're off to settle the score with the King Bee in the Great Forest. The conclusion chapter is penciled by Joe Gallagher and opens years in the past to show us the origin of the King Bee, who started as a lowly exterminator. The man, Elmer Payne by name, is tired of being mocked and ridiculed, so decides to devote himself to the study of entomology in search of a solution. He develops the crystalline form of the insect hormone which can be fed to men, and while it gives them the abilities of the insects, it renders them unintelligent. We see in flashback how he contacted the denizens of the underworld and loaned out his insect men for fantastic crimes. He used his wealth thus accumulated to build a laboratory in the Great Forest, from which he now hears of the JSA thwarting the insect men yet again. Just then, the members of the JSA converge on his home in the Great Forest, but the King Bee is prepared and releases hormone-charged hounds on them. Johnny's Thunderbolt takes care of the dogs, and the guys break into the house and quickly overcome the King Bee. There, they discover antidotes to all of the insect hormones and vow to restore all of the King Bee's victims. And that wraps up the epic story of All-Star Comics number 18. All-Star Comics number 18 is a pretty rare book. There are only 67 universal copies in the CGC Census total, with a median grade of 5.5. At 8.5, this copy ranks at the top 12th percentile with only 5 graded higher. So what is this comic book worth? It's difficult to place a true market value on this comic because they trade hands rather infrequently. In fact, Go Collect notes just 2 low-grade sales in the last 12 months. The last relevant sale was the D copy. Remember, that's the old name for the Crippen pedigree. Graded at a 9.0, which sold for $2,504 plus shipping and taxes in March of 2022 in a Comic Connect auction. That would put the sale at about $2,800 all in. I used a coupon to pick up this copy for $2,500 all in on the Shortboxed app. I think this is full fair market value for this book, but given the relative rarity and the very high grade, I'm perfectly happy paying this for my own core personal collection. Fact is, very few people are interested in selling high-grade Golden Age books at fair market value these days because the market is clearly down, and most folks are holding on to these books now rather than selling them. As an example, the only other copy of All-Star Comics number 18 that meets my buying criteria offered for sale at the moment is a 9.0 copy listed on eBay for $4,500 plus shipping and taxes, which is approximately $2,000 over the last public sale of this book in that grade. With that in mind, I'm really thrilled to add another high-grade copy of All-Star Comics to my collection without paying a big premium and getting myself over 40% of the run complete. It's an embarrassment of riches to be the current caretaker of this piece of American and comic book history. I understand just how fortunate I am to be able to put this sort of capital into a funny book, believe me. For those of you interested in reading the Justice Society of America's Adventures in All-Star Comics with a more modest investment, there are a number of less expensive alternatives. There's digital, of course, and for the analog folks, I recommend the beautiful archive editions from DC, the first of which was published in 1992. I hope you enjoyed this video on this Golden Age All-Star comic featuring the JSA. By adding this beauty to my collection, I'm one step closer to my goal of completing the original run. What are you collecting, and how close are you to completing that collection? Are you a completionist, or do you just go after keys? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Till next time, happy hunting and take care of one another.